The first real hero that I had was a guy named Bix Beiderbecke. You can look him up. He was a famous trumpet player in the 1920s and early 30s. And when I started listening to jazz, especially when I started hearing old jazz like Dixieland, I thought, oh my God, I liked more modern jazz, but Dixieland is very different. And when I started listening to that, and I heard this cool trumpet player, he just had great ideas, nice tone, and really great melodic ideas.
Hi, it's Steph, and that was the voice of Herb Deutsch. Some of you may be familiar with his name and his work. A composer, author, educator, and performer, Herb Deutsch has been a professor of music at Hofstra University in New York for 57 years. Music he composed has been widely performed, and commissioned works have been featured at national and regional conferences. In 1972, he co-founded the Long Island Composers Alliance, and during his career at Hofstra, he founded Jazz Ensemble, Electronic Music Studios, New Music Ensemble, and created a bachelor's degree program in jazz, composition theory, and music business. He received the George Estabrook Distinguished Alumni Award in 1996 and the Hofstra Alumni Achievement Award in 2001. The music department has established the Herbert Deutsch Award for highest honors in music education. Going back even further, in 1964, he collaborated with Bob Moog on the development of the Moog synthesizer, and in September of 1965, his New York Improvisation Quartet presented the Moog's first live program at Town Hall in New York City. Herb is a member and judge of the New York State School Music Association's Composition and Improvisation Committee and a clinician in composition sessions at New York's All-State Conference. As you can tell, he loves music, but also building things and driving fast cars. And you will also learn very quickly in our conversation how much he loves his wife, Nancy. And I can't wait for you to hear more because he has a genius mind and is a total delight. This is the Another Door Opens podcast, and I'm your host, Stephanie Himango. Here is Herb Deutsch. I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me today. It really means a lot. So thank you.
Well, you are quite welcome. I'm not altogether sure where you are headed with this.
Well, it's
but it sounded very good.
It's very much like what we talked about when we spoke previously, maybe with a couple of additions. But before we get really underway, I just wanted to ask you, we're recording this on July 14th of 2020. How have you and your family been doing throughout this COVID time?
That's a good question. We, first of all, my wife and I are alone, which is good. I mean, her children and my children are at different locations. It is basically quiet. I mean, I go for walks almost every day. Sometimes I go for a nice little jog because at one point I used to be a runner for many, many years. I was a runner. For well over 40 years, I ran regularly. But at this point in my life, a little jog is, a half a mile stopping at the end of a quarter.
Still impressive.
Yeah.
So we talked about your work as a composer and many other things. You've worn many hats in your lifetime. I just want to start by asking you, how early did you start composing and playing music?
Okay, that's an interesting question to ask. First of all, I do want you to know I just sent the final material to the Parma Recording Company, Parma, and they are doing a CD of my new chamber music. It won't be until possibly by the end of the year before it's finally produced. But it's
exciting.
been recorded. It's been recorded, and it's chamber music. 10 pieces of chamber music that I wrote completely since I've been married to Nancy. You know, there are times in your life that become times of change.
Mhm.
And I'm not complaining that I didn't have a good first marriage. I was married for 40 years, and my wife died after a 3 years battle with cancer. But but I've known Nancy ever since she was a student in college. Many years later, I hired her to play music. She's a wonderful pianist, and I hired her as a performer to play for me many times, including the beginning of a group called the Long Island Composers Alliance. I started that group in 1972, and the solo pianist on that group was Nancy.
And then how
And
many years later was it that you
it
fell
was
in love
many
and
years.
got married?
Well, that's amazing. We knew each other, and we had a friendship. And my first wife and I went to the bar mitzvahs of their two sons, her two sons. So we were friends, but we were never close friends, and that was beautiful. And when we got together in 1996, a year after my first wife died, and it was literally love at first sight. We knew each other all those years, and there was absolutely no love thing between us. It was friendship, but it became it was just a beautiful, I think I'm the luckiest person in the world.
What a beautiful love
and it was,
story.
and I will tell you that it was after Nancy and I got married, is when I started composing again, and being recorded are 10 pieces of chamber music, all that I composed all in that period of time after Nancy and I were married.
I can't
Yes,
wait to hear
it's
it.
a beautiful and different story.
And so that's the most recent. Do you remember the very
Okay.
farthest back where you began?
Yes. Yes. And I go back to your first question. We were quite poor. We had a chicken farm, and we had a separate garage from the house. And I was out playing in the garage. I was 3 years old. And I was playing in the garage. I had a stick in my hand, and I was tapping the stick on the ground. And there was no, on the ground in the garage. And I noticed that if I tapped the stick up, up a certain amount of time, it would go from a C to a D. And then I realized if I tapped it a little further, it would go C, D, E, and then it would go C, D, E, F, G by tapping it at different places. And then I could start playing little melodies on that. And then all of a sudden, my brain came in and took over. And I suddenly realized that, of course, the goddamn ground was not making notes. It was just noise. There was no music. And I got so scared. I remember this. I ran crying into my mother. And I had no idea how that could be true. And by the time I was 4 years old, I was taking piano lessons.
What scared you? Do you remember? I know you were only a little tiny guy at the time.
What scared me is that I realized that there was no music being made by that thing on the ground. And what scared me is the reality of my brain being two kinds of brains. I can say that now. I could say that now as a much grown-up guy. Now, in reality, musicians, all of them, including myself, will sit down and play whole songs with their fingers on the table. And you've seen that. I'm sure you've seen people, musicians can, sitting there, and it looks like they're, just playing little rhythmically things with their fingers. Pianists especially do that all the time now. And you don't get scared by it because it's all in your mind. But at that point, it was like, what the hell am I hearing, and how could I be hearing it? But my mother was terrific, and my family was acceptable to that. And although we were poor, we had a terrible piano. But I was able to start taking piano lessons when I was 4 years old. And to answer your first question, The first time I remember actually writing music down was when I was 5.5 years old. And I remember that because I still have a sheet of music, a sheet of blank music with scrawly notes on it, but it was a little melody. And I did write the notes down, but because by that time I had piano lessons and I knew what the notes were and where they were on the staff. That is the beginning of being a composer. In truth, I started writing down things while I was still in the beginning of elementary school. I mean, by the time I got to third grade, there was I don't know if it still exists, a national day called Arbor Day,
right,
where people celebrate trees.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a little song.
Do you remember how it goes?
Oh, absolutely. It goes, trees on Arbor Day, trees blooming in churchyards and schoolyards. And I don't remember the rest of the words, but I remember the tune. Dee da da, dee da da, da da dee da da da. It was, a silly, simple little melody.
Beautiful.
I actually wrote that piece and brought it into school and sang it for my class in the third grade.
I bet your teachers were like, "Who is this child?"
Yeah, that's exactly what they were. And it wasn't always great because I did a lot of naughty things. One of the greatest things that I did, one of the really greatest things that I did, some relative of mine from Florida sent me a little baby alligator, a living alligator, which was probably about 10 inches long. And we kept that alligator. My brother or my father made a metal box for it so they could live outside until it got to. I kept that alligator for many years, and then I gave it away to an animal farm. But when I was little, in the third grade, I did bring the alligator in my shirt with its head sticking out through the shirt. I knew I was being naughty, and I got into trouble for it.
I love that. I have a question for you.
Okay, let me get back to your questions.
No, I love these stories. You go off and share any anecdotes and extra stories you want, because that's the beauty. I'm just curious if you could take me inside the composer's mind for a minute. Maybe this didn't happen early before you learned piano, but when something comes to mind for you, do you reach for an instrument? Do you reach for a pencil so as not to let that thought or idea escape?
That's a good question. That's in my mind all the time. I try to think about it. It's not an easy question. I think most of the time, and I'm talking about, of course, my adult life, I would, if I had something like that, I would like to go to the piano and play it and see where it would go and explore it a little bit. And if I liked it, I would write it down. And I mean, right until this very day in my life, probably 6 months ago, I had a little melody came to my mind, and I got up and grabbed a piece of blank paper and sat at the piano, and I wrote down maybe 8 bars of the melody idea, and realized that it was a kind of an interesting thing for an ensemble. And you don't go to your piano to work anymore. You go to your computer to work, because you can listen to ideas and print them out and then explore how they sound. And then that last little melody ended up as a string trio: violin, viola, and cello. Yeah.
Do you wake up hearing music? Do you compose in your dreams ever?
I don't think so. I wake up all day long. I hear music. I mean, it's very hard for me not to think of music. I don't hear it. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I hear it, but I hear it in my brain. I know that the music is there. And while we're talking to you, I purposely put a little melody in my brain. While we were talking to you, my head was going da da dee da dee da da da, and then it's just and very often it's tunes that I know. Very often it's music from television. But what I hear stays in my head all the time. You don't stop hearing in some way or another. You don't stop hearing music in some way or another. I can be sitting there and thinking, oh, good, this would be harmonized in the following way. And if it were written for piano, the left hand would be doing this. And if it were written, the right hand would be doing that. And I think a lot about piano, but I've played piano all my life, but I'm not a real pianist. I play the piano in jazz bands now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the piano player, and I'm actually have a rehearsal tonight. I have 3 bands I'm playing with, and I'll be with them tonight, tomorrow, and Thursday at different times.
And you play,
and there I'll be playing piano with big bands, and I'm playing their music. Playing a lot of jazz. At heart, I'm a kind of composer, so I improvise very, very easily. That's what I always loved about jazz. What I loved when I first really became aware of that love, I remember that I was 11 years old. And the reason I remember that I was 11 is I had just started playing the trumpet. And I would listen to things on the radio, and I suddenly, when I hear chords or when I hear things playing, my mind improvises. The more you practice that, the better you get at it. The improvisation requires skill and technique on your instrument. And now, I'll be honest that at my age, I'm getting a little close to 90, and I have a little more trouble playing the trumpet or the flugelhorn or the instruments that I played all the time. I always played piano, but
In the course of your life, what instruments have you played?
Well, I always played piano, so when I was a little kid, and the first instrument that I got very interested in was the trumpet. And I became primarily a trumpet player. And I played the trumpet in high school, college. I played trumpet in the Army. I joined the Army. I was in the 75th Army Band for 2 years as a trumpet player, stationed down by Washington, D.C. And trumpet was always my main instrument, but I always had a piano in the house. So the fact is that I really didn't study piano again until I went for a master's degree, and then at that point I went for a master's degree at Manhattan School of Music, which is a major conservatory in New York, and I went as a composition major. And so my piano playing wasn't that great, so I took a year of college piano study with a teacher in a music school. And so I got to be a decent pianist, but, I never considered myself a piano soloist. And I married one. And that's the cool thing. I mean, Nancy's a pianist. And that she is a pianist, a wonderful pianist, and a piano soloist and a piano teacher. So sometimes we even play together. She'll play piano and I'll play flugelhorn. The flugelhorn is like a trumpet.
What a beautiful marriage! Beautiful marriage of love, of music, and all of it.
It is. We both are so amazed at how perfect it is. And we've been married for 23 years already.
See, great love story. We transition here to some conversation about music and machines. And before we do, I want to fill you in on something you may or may not already know about Herb Deutsch. I mentioned it briefly in the introduction, but Herb is the co-inventor of the Moog synthesizer. You can learn much more about this at moogfoundation.org. But in short, Bob Moog's invention of the Moog synthesizer in 1964, in collaboration with Herb Deutsch, revolutionized almost every genre of music, offering performers new sonic possibilities in which to express their creativity. The site goes on to say that for many musicians, the synthesizer transformed their lives and work. In 1963, Bob Moog, who had an early passion for electronics and engineering, met experimental jazz musician and Hofstra professor Herb Deutsch at a New York State educators music conference, and they began talking about new possibilities for composing music with new electronically generated sounds. Like I said, you can read more about it at moogfoundation.org or visit thehenryford.org, where I first learned about the story, and also where they have Bob Moog's prototype synthesizer, and it's very cool. And oh, in case you ever find yourself in a debate about the spelling and or pronunciation of this magical music machine, it's spelled M-O-O-G, and it's pronounced Moog. I think of your integral work as co-inventor of the Moog synthesizer. In your mind, how do mechanics and music complement each other? I know that's been a theme for your life.
Yes, it has. It's interesting to say to think of that. I remember as a child, as a little boy, getting presents, birthday presents, or Christmas presents. We're a Jewish family, but we were sort of a Jewish family, but we also had a Christmas tree. I recall. But I recall, getting presents, and the presents that I loved were things that you could put together and assemble and build. I love that. The other thing is that when I was old enough, like in high school, I became so interested in cars and automobiles, and I became interested in their engines, how they worked, and what you could do with a car. And it was obvious. My brother, who's 10 years older than me, who is no longer living, but my brother was 10 years older than me when I was about 14, I think, or 14. I think he gave me the chassis of an old 1928 Plymouth. Now,
just the chassis.
The chassis with the radiator and engine, the steering column came up, and it had four wheels, and the engine. The first thing I did is I got the engine running, and the next thing that I did is I designed a body and built the entire body out of aluminum. I built a whole body. I was living on Long Island, and there was places, I don't even remember where they were, where you could buy sheets of aluminum. And on my driveway in my house at that time, I built a car, the two-passenger car, based on the look of an existing car at that period called the Auburn, which was an American car. And I built what looked like a fishtailed Auburn, and I built it, got it running, and I did everything. I went to junkyards. I bought seats. I bought lights. I did all the electrical work. I got the entire car completed and licensed. And when I was 16 years old, I actually got a license for a driver's license for the car. I mean, I was old enough at that point. You could get a learner's permit, I think, when you were 16. I mean, my brother or somebody helped me get my learn to drive and get my license. But the car was completed, and if you would like, I can send you a picture of it.
I would love to see a picture of that. Hi, do you want to see the picture too? You can go to the podcast Instagram page to see the photo of this incredible car at Podcast ADO. So that was exactly the same time you've already been very much introduced and involved in music.
Oh, absolutely. I was the first trumpet player in the high school band, high school orchestra. I sang in the chorus. And when I was a senior, my guidance counselor, you had to have a guidance counselor.
Yes.
And my guidance counselor said to me, well, he said, there are two things in your life you're going to be. You're either going to be a musician or you're going to be a race car driver.
Wow.
I never became a race car driver, but I loved sports cars and racing cars. I did love to go to watch car races, and I've always loved doing that. And actually, I will tell you one crazy story. After Nancy and I were married, I was 74 years old, and I took 3 days of race car driving practice.
Where did you do that?
In a place that you paid for them, and they gave you you could do race car practice driving.
So did you get the whole outfit, the helmet, and you get in the car and they let you go?
Of course, yeah. Of course, I had to have a helmet. You had to have it all. And I didn't. And it wasn't. We never did a real race, but I did drive a race car.
What speed did you get up to?
They didn't have a speedometer. There's no speedometer. You could see the oil pressure and water temperature and the RPM, the revolutions per minute.
Do you think that's the fastest in your life that you've ever driven?
Yes and no. It's the fastest thing that I ever drove because of the idea of driving a race car.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, when Nancy and I got married, and that was now, as I told you, 23 years ago, I had just bought a brand new Porsche Speedster. And when the first thing we did after we got married is drive across the entire country, from New York to California, in a Porsche Speedster, stopping in motels, just taking a drive without any definite plan of where we were going. Just went to places that we thought would be cool.
And
we went across. It took a good long time going across country. So yeah, again, that's another thing where Nancy comes into my life.
It's beautiful. On the subject of inspiration, where the music comes from, do you feel inspired, for example, when you're writing a piece that you've been asked to write, or when you're improvising with no agenda in mind? Or do you start somewhere and then enjoy going off-road? You talked a lot about improvisation.
I love to write music that people ask me to write. I mean, I love to do that, but I don't think it's the same kind of thrill as when you just want to do it on your own.
Do you have any, or did you ever have any heroes in the world of music?
Yeah, I did. When I started playing jazz and started to play trumpet, the first real hero that I had was a guy named Bix Beiderbecke. You can look him up. He was a famous trumpet player in the 1920s and early 30s. And when I started listening to jazz, especially when I started hearing old jazz like Dixieland, I thought, oh my God, I liked more modern jazz, but Dixieland is very different. And when I started listening to that, and I heard this cool trumpet player, he just had great ideas, nice tone, and really great melodic ideas. And I then looked through as much as I could find of Bix Beiderbecke, and you will, if you wrote the name down, you'll see. All you have to do is go to a computer. And I'm sure you'll find out why he's fascinating.
I did look him up, and I found quite a bit online. I'll mention just a note here about his musical background. Leon Bismarck Beiderbecke, or Bix, was born in Davenport, Iowa in 1903. He was an American jazz cornetist, pianist, and composer. Beiderbecke is said to be one of the most influential jazz soloists of the 1920s, noted for an inventive lyrical approach and purity of tone. He died at the young age of 28 in his Queens, New York apartment, and his body was returned to Iowa, where he was laid to rest. I want to ask you a little bit about turning points. I know in a lifetime, one has many. You and I discussed this a little bit, and you said that it'd be okay
certainly did.
to ask this, but is there a turning point or two in your life that felt most salient for you and maybe taught you some kind of lesson that you feel has been very valuable to you going forward that you'd be willing to share here?
I'm trying to think, and both in and out of music. Music has been, so much of everything in my life that it's hard to turning points. The biggest turning point in my life was when my family became very poor, and by that time I had just wanted to start playing trumpet, and I was about 10 or 11 years old, and my family's home was taken away because my father was ill and unable to pay, and we had leased. I didn't know that I was a kid, but we had leased the entire farm. It was like a home, which was like a little chicken farm. Mm. It was a complete home with I think 3 or 4 chicken coops and a garage. And we didn't own it, and I didn't know anything about that. I was too young to know. My family didn't get me upset over anything, but they lost the house. And my father was not, at that time, he was not working. My brother was too young. It was just before he went into the army. My sister took some kind of a job. She finished high school, but she never went to college. And we had no money, and we moved and lived on the second floor of a Chinese restaurant. Literally in a second floor, we had, 3 or 4 maybe rooms, and we shared it with the guys who worked in the Chinese restaurant, who were all Chinese. That's the biggest major turn that happened in my life. And then one of my uncles helped out with some money, and we were able to move into a small, newly built house, a very small house, which is where I lived when I designed my car. And there's no pictures of that house, but it was a little house, but it was a real house with a driveway.
Do you feel that experience made you more appreciative of when things are good in life?
Yeah, absolutely. It's straightforward. I can't go into any detail. I suddenly was able to feel like I belonged to the right grade in school, and I was young enough to have been hurt, but old enough to have been ready to see my life improve.
That's beautiful. Well, I just want to say again, it's been a privilege talking to you. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I really appreciate the glimpses of insight that we could see into the mind of a composer such as yourself, because while you've been living in your own head with yourself for all this time, it's really a novelty for those of us who don't have those types of gifts and understandings to be able to just hear from you a little bit. So thank you so much, Herb Deutsch.
Okay, you're very, very welcome. And good luck on the growth of this, Stephanie. I hope that things go beautifully for you, and I look forward to seeing where it goes.
Thank you so much. And I'll stay in touch.
I'm delighted to be part of it.
Thank you. I just want to listen to that on a loop while looking at trees. Isn't it soothing? Herb Deutsch, I say to you, thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights, your humor, and your love story with us. You are truly an inspiration. Before I share a short story of another door opening from my own life, which I'll sometimes do at the end of the podcast, I just want to remind you the Another Door Opens podcast is about open doors, open hearts, and open minds. I have conversations every week with a different guest, reminding us that everyone has a unique life perspective. I believe if we each learn a little bit about another person's story, we will all naturally be reminded to care more and judge less, to celebrate differences and seek common ground. To all of you listening, thank you for being here. This podcast is still new, and it means the world to me that you are here with me on this ride. Each weekly episode is different from the last, so please continue to sample, to download the podcast, and hop online wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe to it. If you like it, maybe you could give it a 5-star review. That would be cool. Or tell a friend or two. If you want to support the making of the show and be even more involved, you can do that by subscribing for as little as $1 a month. So check out the options and the perks that go with those options at patreon.com/anotherdoor-opens. Thank you so much to my first several Patreon supporters who have already logged on and subscribed. I appreciate you. You can find the podcast on social media and follow it there at Podcast at Podcast ADO. That's Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And before I get to my story, special thanks to Eric Brown for the drum beats and to Jonathan Raz, who edited this piece. For today's short story of another door opening in my own life, I just want to share with you a little bit more about how I became aware of Herb Deutsch and his work. As some of you know, I work as a writer and producer on a TV program called The Henry Ford's Innovation Nation with Mo Rocca, which airs on CBS on Saturday mornings. We did a story for that show a while back with the Henry Ford Museum's Curator of Communications and Information Technology, Kristen Gallerno, about the Bob Moog prototype synthesizer. Kristen also made us aware of the integral role Herb Deutsch played in the development of that machine. And in the process of putting the story together, we reached out to Herb Deutsch for some photographs, and we have remained connected ever since. And that's today's short story of another door opening in my own life. Now go outside if you're not already there, and look at some trees. Thank you for being here. See you next time. Love you. Bye.